trauma and trauma-focused psychotherapy. We'll start out with what is trauma, impact of trauma and loss, then the structure of healing, and some of the leading and cutting-edge research-supported psychotherapy approaches. And I am going through the handouts so you can kind of follow along. I want to start out by talking about what kinds of, you know what? I'm going to get out my computer because then I don't have to keep putting on my glasses because the handout's larger on my computer. Just take me a minute. Yeah, this is better. Okay. So here's a partial list of problems that can be caused or made worse by trauma. Disruptive behaviors, poor frustration tolerance, depression, withdrawal, don't care anymore, anxiety, worry, trouble concentrating or staying focused or getting your stuff done, fighting, truancy, substance abuse, crime, suicide. Did I leave anything out?
What if you have all of the above?
That's possible. It turns out that just about any presenting problem that somebody might come to therapy for can either be caused or made worse by trauma. Now, I used to say except for the major mental health disorders like bipolar or schizophrenia, but you know what? They mostly have precipitating events. So it's not that trauma is the only cause of problems, but trauma is a stressor that will find your weak link and break it. So whatever your predisposition is or whatever your life situation is, trauma will stress that and it will come out some way or another. So what is trauma? I'm going to start out with a very general definition. It's when something really bad happens. But not every really bad thing is traumatic. Some things are upsetting without being traumatic. What makes something traumatic? It's the difference between, I hate this, but I can handle it, as opposed to, I hate this, and it's too much. I can't handle it. So with trauma, there's a sense of it being too much, it's overwhelming, and so you're often going to find a sense of helplessness or powerlessness. If anybody has read Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's book on death and dying, wave your hand, or nod your head, that counts too, okay. She hung around with people who had lost loved ones, and what she observed is that some people got messed up from that. Many people did. Over time, some people stayed messed up, whereas some people came out stronger than before. The ones who came out stronger than before, she observed a pattern of experiences they went through. She called it stages of grief processing. And I'm going to give you a case example of that using my own language. I do work a lot with children, so I use a lot of food metaphors and movie metaphors. We'll start with food. Let's say your dog died. It hurts this much. Sooner or later, when I get around to it, I'm going to take a bite out of that. And the first bite, according to Kubler-Ross's model, might be denial. Can't believe she's dead. I'm going to come home, open the door, she's going to bark, jump on me, wag her tail, just like Elf. The next bite, maybe 10 minutes later, maybe a week later, whenever I get around to it, anger. She is dead, and I'm mad. I hate that person who ran her over, hate myself, I shouldn't have let her run outside, hate everybody else too. Then, sadness, miss her. And of course, it's not always just one bite at each phase, and it's not in a perfect order, but it's a pattern. Then, perspective. Maybe forgiveness, acceptance, humor. All right, I'm sorry she's dead, I miss her, but I'm glad I let her run outside. She was a happy dog, she loved to run outside. She had a lot of good years. If this was just a recovery model, I'm okay now, that would be the end of it. But this is a growth model, to make you stronger model. The final phase Kubler-Ross observed among those people who did come out stronger than before. They found some healthy, constructive way to maintain the relationship with the lost person or dog. So how do you maintain a healthy relationship with a person you've lost? It sounds a little strange only for a moment until we think about what we actually do. I carry him in my heart. I talk to her at night. I tell stories about her. I do something he taught me how to do. I carry on her work. I wear his jacket. Right? There are so many ways that we stay connected to people we've lost in ways that make us more than before. It turns out that trauma processing follows about the same track. Okay, early on, maybe there's a phase of fear in there somewhere. The rest of it goes pretty much along the same track. Until you get to that final step, you're not necessarily going to make a healthy relationship with the tree that fell on your car or the stranger who attacked you. But the essence of that phase is the same. It's about making something out of what happened to be more than you were before. It could be as simple as, now I know how strong I am. Or maybe, now that I've been through this, I have more compassion or understanding for other people. Or even, I'm going to take this thing that happened to me and I'm going to do something good in the world because of that. So when, you know, the expression, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, when that's true, this is one way of understanding how that works. What happens with these bites you take out of the thing that hurts? Well, you chew them up. They don't all taste good, but you chew them up, you digest it, it becomes part of your nutrition, something you grow from. The more bites you take out, the part that hurts gets smaller and smaller. Now what the brain scientists are saying is, before you take the bites out, this is just a jumble of stuff, fragments, images, thoughts, emotions, physical sensations. And as you go through digesting the memory, one of the things you're doing is you're organizing it into a coherent story, you're integrating it, bringing your psychological resources to bear on it, integrating it with the rest of your history. What becomes part of long-term memory, part of the past. That's the idea. What if the bad thing that happened is this bad? Wow, this is so big, I don't even know where to start taking a bite out of it. And also, this is too much, I can't stand it. I know what to do. I'll push it out of the way, I'll put up a wall, it's there, I'm here. And my therapy clients explain this to me before I even explain it to them. They say, no, that stuff doesn't bother me. I try to forget about it. I keep it out of my mind. People do this because it works. It's out of my face, I can get through the day. It's an effective, quick relief strategy. But here's where the food metaphor breaks down. If you eat something that's bad for you, you get rid of it. If you have an experience that's bad for you, you may try to get rid of it, but it doesn't really go away. It stays fresh behind that wall for a week, a month, a year, 50 years. And when I've asked people to bring up their trauma memory, even 50 years later, they will say things like, wow, it's so vivid, it's like yesterday, or I'm there. And it's always waiting for a chance to come out from behind the wall, get digested, go through the system, and become part of the past. So, you're walking around minding your own business. Some little thing comes along that you should be able to take care of that in a quick bite or two, but it happens to be related in some way to the stuff behind the wall. The stuff behind the wall, it's like a sore spot. Some little thing hits a sore spot, it can feel like a big thing. Because all this stuff says, oh yeah, me too, me too. For example, I'm thinking of an 11-year-old boy who's got a lot of stuff behind his wall from all the times his father told him what was wrong with him, gave him whippings. So what's back there behind the wall? The memories, the images from what happened. People learn from experience, right? So what did he learn about himself? Things like, I'm not safe, I'm weak, I can't protect myself. What kinds of emotions might be back there? Fear, shame, sadness, anger. Okay, so he's walking down the hall at school. Somebody bumps him by accident. Fortunately, in that moment, he's able to say to himself, all right, getting bumped is this irritating. The rest of my reaction, that's just my father's stuff. We wish, right? What happens? He gets bumped, hits the sore spot, and now he's like this. I'm being attacked. And I'm weak and scared and helpless. And this is too much, I can't stand it. That's why I keep it behind the wall. I gotta get rid of this quick. I know what to do. If I fill up with anger and do something aggressive, I can get rid of this stuff. A teacher happened to be walking by, saw the whole thing, drags him to the office, says, he just popped somebody in the face out of the blue. He says, no, self-defense. He's not lying. For him, that's what happened. So this push it behind the wall strategy, it works as a quick relief strategy, but then you're walking around with a sore spot. And any little thing that happens to hit the sore spot can feel like a big thing. And if you think about the way you and those you know may be generally competent, but in certain areas overreact. This is one way of understanding that overreaction, whether the overreaction is anger or fear or discouragement or sadness or worry or shame or whatever it is. Because we all have those sore spots. Another problem with this push it behind the wall system is that when the stuff does come out, you can't negotiate with it because it's not part of your psychology. It never got integrated. For example, think about the rape victims you may have known, who might say something like this. Okay, I know it wasn't my fault, I didn't deserve it, but I can't help but feeling when this stuff comes out. I can't help but feeling dirty, ashamed, etc. So what do you have behind the wall? The images from the memory, the negative beliefs, lessons learned, the piled up emotions, physical sensations. And people who are having these sore spot reactions might not get much sympathy from other people because we don't always see what hits somebody else's sore spot. What we might see from the outside is just that they pop somebody in the face out of the blue, or whatever it is. I want to talk now about memory reconsolidation. If you've ever heard of that term, raise your hand. Cool, okay. This is the neuroscience terminology for what we more colloquially call trauma healing. In other words, the process of taking this stuff out from behind the wall and guiding a therapy client to digest it bite by bite so that the memory can be transformed. The wound disappears, it goes into long-term memory where it becomes something you grow from. There's a definitive body of research by now describing the series of activities the brain has to have for this trauma healing to get done. So I'm gonna go through the steps and then I'll give you a case example so it makes sense. Memory reconsolidation works when, first of all, the memory is retrieved and activated. If you say, oh yeah, I know about that thing behind the wall, that's fine, but nothing's gonna happen. It's gotta be live and in your face. Then conflicting or contradictory information gets introduced. This doesn't get the healing done, but it destabilizes or unlocks the memory, because if you don't do all this, that memory can stay the way it is indefinitely. So once you have destabilized or unlocked the memory, you have a 5-hour window. And if in that 5-hour window you repeatedly introduce further corrective information, then the transformation can occur. Case example. This is a woman in her early 30s, married, has a job. She's in therapy because the driving negative belief is, I don't matter. And when that's your guiding belief, you probably haven't organized your relationships in a very nice way. So she's in therapy, she knew it was a problem. So we track it back to, where did you learn this? And in fact, she learned it in a lot of ways, because when that's how you organize your life, you get that reinforced. First place she learned it, she said, I was 5 years old. My baby brother was born. And my father, I'm going to use my language here, basically, her father threw a parade. He was so excited because this was the boy. And my client had never seen her father be a tenth as excited about anything to do with her or her sister, but this was the boy. So we go into that memory with one of the methods I'll be talking about later, where she gets activated and then goes sort of through it over and over. Very quickly, you get the red face, the teary eyes, and on the 0 to 10 scale for how bad it feels right now, she was about a 9. Retrieved and activated, step 1. Okay. So she's going through this memory. Pretty soon she says, wait a minute, my uncle was crazy about me. He thought I was great. In other words, if I don't matter, if I'm not important, why would my uncle think I'm so great? There's your conflicting or contradictory information. Now the memory is destabilized. And of course, we don't wait 5 hours, we just go back in and go back in. And you think Google is cool? You want to see brains. I mean, people in the right situation, their brains will just search and find just what they need. And over the next 21 minutes or so, she's coming up with one example after another of this relationship and that accomplishment and this responsible role she had. Over and over again, examples of why she did matter. Until by the end of the session, which took less than half an hour for the whole thing, by the way, instead of her saying, I'm feeling really upset and ashamed because I don't matter, now she's no longer distressed. On the 0 to 10 scale, she's a 0. And she's saying, my father was kind of pathetic. He didn't even know how to love his own kids. So that's a one session example of how the memory reconsolidation process can work. Memory is retrieved and activated, conflicting information is introduced, and then further repetitions of one bit of corrective information after another. Of course, she had a lot of other memories to work through as well, which she did. And then she left her marriage and changed her life and really became a lot happier, because now that she mattered, she had to organize things differently. So there are a lot of types of therapy. which you've been learning about in this class, I will divide them into two types. Symptom management versus trauma healing. And there's a lot of other ways to divide it too, but this is how I'm going to do it.
Why are you dividing them into that? Because
because many or most problems are driven by the stuff behind the wall. The sore spot with the negative beliefs, the emotions, and there's actually a lot of research on trauma causing almost any diagnosis.
right, yeah.
And so basically the memories behind the wall are just kind of frozen there. And there are many types of therapy that work on self-management, whether it's behavior or self-talk or meditation or yoga to calm the physiology down. And that's all useful stuff. But that's a way to manage the reactivity and the pain. Or you can go in there and do the memory reconsolidation and heal the wounds so there's no more symptoms to manage. So to me, those are two very different approaches.
Yeah.
And I know there's other ways you can divide it too. This is just the way I do. Okay. So there are quite a few proven effective trauma healing methods. It's a great time to be in the field if you don't mind being economics, because for the first time in history, we have systematic, efficient ways that we can help people heal. It's cool. And I'm going to talk first about the ways that these are all the same, and then I'll talk about some ways that they're different. Whatever method you're going to use to help somebody face and work through their trauma memories, you're still going to have to prepare them the same way. A therapy client still has to learn to trust you and feel safe and comfortable with you. They're still going to have to get some understanding of what's going on with them and how the trauma is affecting them, because if healing the trauma is the solution, the trauma wound has to be the problem, right? So you've got to develop that understanding of what's going on. The client has to have some kind of positive life goal that makes it worth their while to do the work, right? They've got to be trying for something that their problems are interfering with. So they've got to understand what's going on. They've got to be motivated enough to do the work. They've got to be stable enough to do the work, and they've got to be strong enough to do the work. So whatever trauma resolution method you're using, the tricky part of therapy is getting your clients to that point. Trauma resolution methods, they're techniques. They're cool techniques and they take some learning, but they all require taking your clients to where they're more or less ready, willing, and able to do it. None of the magic wand methods have been proven effective yet, maybe next year. But for now, all of the proven effective methods require the client to do the work, to actually activate that memory and chew it up bite by bite. If you just leave that memory behind the wall, that's very nice, but you're not going to get your digesting done. If you knock the wall down and the memory comes out, you're going to be so busy trying not to drown that you're also not going to be getting any digesting done. As a matter of fact, some of the old trauma therapies had names like implosion therapy and flooding and very high dropout rates, because the clients would get overwhelmed and triggered and couldn't do it.
I was just wondering, is the chewing up, would you describe that as like just feeling, or feeling as well as like making new associations?
Okay, so what happens during the digestion process?
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm wondering about. Like.
I'll get into that a little more in a little while, but the quick version is a lot happens. And some of it may be desensitization, some of it may be new understandings, and some of it may be emotional processing, for example, crying it out. So it seems like all of those things can be involved. Maybe some other things too. Okay. So there has to be access and activation, but not too much access and activation, or the client gets overwhelmed and they can't do it. So all of the proven effective methods have some way of helping the client access and activate their memory, but only be dealing with 1 or 2 bytes at a time that they can handle, rather than everything at once. And as the pig famously said, some of these methods are more equal than others. When it comes to things like the client's ability to tolerate the procedure, the types of clients, the types of presenting problems it works with, how quickly you get the job done, and how easy it is for therapists to get good at this. So I'm going to go through a review of some of the leading research-supported trauma healing methods. Prolonged exposure. This slide used to say the gold standard, but I took out the G a few years ago. But it does have about 4 decades of research now, and it's very, it's a solid method. I'm going to tell you how to do these things. This is just the quick version. Don't try this at home. Here's the instructions we give the client. I'm going to ask you to tell the story of this trauma memory in detail. Tell me each thing that happens. Say it in the present tense, like it's happening right now. Along with each thing that's happening, say what you're feeling and what you're thinking. And when you get to the end, I'll ask you to tell it again. And then again, and again, and again, and again, and again. And some versions even have you listen to a tape of your telling it for homework. It's really just over and over again. So this does work. It's got tons of research support. The theory for why it works, there are a couple of leading theories. The main one is that as you tell it and you realize that you're not actually still in it, your fear response extinguishes. A related theory is that you're desensitizing to it. Right? Did you ever see a movie that you cried your eyes out, and then by the 3rd or 4th time you see it, it's like, oh yeah, that part? Right? It loses its sting after a while. Something else that may be happening, as a trauma memory is digested and healed, those fragments get organized into a narrative, into a coherent narrative, while the prolonged exposure story structures that narrative, so that can be facilitating it as well. The problem with prolonged exposure is that it's quite an ordeal. It goes on and on and on. It hurts. It's torture. So if you look at the laboratory studies, the dropout rates may be pretty low. But if you look at the implementation studies, okay, so here's the difference. A laboratory study is you get your big grant, you're screening your participants, you're running a study, and dropout rates tend to be low in those studies. An implementation study is you go to a VA hospital or a community mental health center or whatever, where you've got a bunch of therapists, you train them and you say, no, just do your work, okay? In the implementation studies, nobody's doing it. The therapists who are trained don't offer it, and even when they do offer it, the clients will either refuse or they'll start an input. So it's really difficult to do. And that's not to say it's not happening at all. I know some places where they're using it and they're getting the clients to do it, and it does work. But it's quite an ordeal.
I have a question. So in terms of if someone was going through a grieving experience, what would be certain tactics or tools to use so that to prevent this prolonged exposure from turning into an obsession or a mortalization of the being? That's what I was just thinking of as this prolonged.
In other words, I'm going to reframe that and you tell me if I'm still getting what you're asking. Why is a trauma treatment method not going to just contribute to somebody's existing obsession and going over and over the memory the way they already are? Is that kind of what you're asking?
A little bit. Well, I totally understand the acknowledging of it and the acceptance, but I'm just curious of how this approach would relate to somebody who already is like,
Well, that's one of the classic post-traumatic stress symptoms, right? Is going over it and over it in your mind even when you don't want to. And so what these trauma healing methods seem to do is help people make movement on it rather than just spinning their wheels. And again, that goes back to what's actually happening. So there may be some desensitization. That's, one of the leading theories in prolonged exposure. There may be some insights happening that makes things click so that they're not stuck anymore. And there may be some emotional working through where you sort of cry it out and then it's not the same as it was before. So it's not always the same person to person or even memory to memory. But yeah, and a lot of clients ask that too. I think about this all the time already. Why do you want me to talk about it here? Because there's something about these methods that gets it moving instead of just more stuckness. Trauma-focused CBT, CBT by the way stands for cognitive behavioral therapy, you probably knew that already, is a variant of prolonged exposure that's been modified to work for children. Because children can't just sit in a chair and go blah, 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 blah over and over again. So with trauma-focused CBT, the therapist guides the child to create a storybook of the trauma event. And while the child is drawing a particular page, like a particular step in the story, they're also coloring it in and chatting with the therapist about what the person is thinking and feeling. So they're still getting their work done, but in a way that a kid can do. Trauma-focused CBT is probably the best researched of the child's trauma therapies. It's got a lot of research support, it works, it's a nicely designed treatment. There are a couple of problems with it. One is that it takes, maybe 10, 15 sessions to clean up a single trauma, which is fine for what we call the unicorn clients, otherwise high-functioning people who had a single incident trauma. And so what if a kid's got to be in therapy for 3 or 4 months? It's no big deal. But you know what? Most of the clients we see, whether it's in community mental health or private practice, most of the clients we see have an accumulation of traumatic events, not just one. And many of our clients have been exposed to even chronic trauma. And so it's going to take a pretty long time to help somebody heal from their trauma if they've got a very big pile and each one takes 5 or 10 or 15 sessions. Another problem with trauma. Yeah.
Sorry, how do you feel about EMDR?
It's farther down on the slide.
Okay,
It's coming.
got it.
I love it when people ask the next thing I'm going to say.
Yeah, it's important to
Yeah.
talk about.
Yeah. Another problem with trauma-focused CBT is that it's mainly been developed in laboratory studies, and it has had a very rough translation to clinical practice. So what you do, you get a $500,000 grant, you screen 200 children to find the 40 you're going to include in your study who've had a single incident sexual assault by a non-family member, who are not left-handed, who are not ADHD, whose parents are not divorced. And that way, when you randomize them to trauma-focused CBT versus brand X, and trauma-focused CBT does better, you can be sure it's about the treatment and not any of these extraneous factors. So you get a highly controlled study, you get to be published in a top journal, and the kids you include in your study aren't like any kids I see in my practice. Because the kids I see in my practice have ADHD and their parents are divorced and they're also depressed. And in addition to that thing, they had 2 other different traumas as well. And so I've spoken with representatives of agencies where they've all been trained. They have on their website, this is our model, this is what we do. And I'll ask them, so what percentage of your clients do you get all the way through the trauma healing? And the typical answer is, maybe 5%. It has not translated well into clinical practice. And maybe it'll be tweaked so it will translate well, but it hasn't. A narrative exposure therapy, on the other hand, was developed with the most difficult populations you can imagine. For example, former child soldiers, war refugees, etc., children and adults. Narrative exposure therapy isn't so well known in this country. It's mainly been used in Africa and then in Europe with refugees. So here's how NET works. In the very first session, you lay a rope across the floor of your office. Or maybe you draw a line across the dirt if your office is outside, whatever. And you say to your client, this is a timeline of your life. Here is when you were born, here is today, here is into the future. Every place on this timeline where something bad happened, I want you to place a stone. Every place on this timeline that something good happened, place a flower. Of course, when you're the therapist, you have to have a supply of stones and flowers to make this work. So the client creates a timeline of all the good things and bad things that have happened and that they anticipate will happen. That's all in the first session. Broader life perspective. In the next session, they pick the first trauma memory and they do essentially prolonged exposure. And yet, this seems to be more efficient than standard prolonged exposure. They only do one exposure session per memory. Then the next session, they move on to the next memory. And children can do this, unlike standard prolonged exposure. So what's the difference? That first session, that rope on the ground, where the client places their whole history and future. When you work with trauma survivors, you will find that many people identify as trauma victims. They will say in one way or another, this is who I am. I am a child abuse victim. I am a combat veteran with PTSD. This is who I am. That's their identity. Once they've done their trauma healing, they'll say it a little differently. They'll say, yeah, that happened to me and it harmed me. But I am much more than that thing that happened to me. And my life is much more than those events. I used to think that this broader life perspective was a result of trauma healing, but I've come to believe that it's a facilitator of trauma healing. That being able to put that rope on the ground and see your whole life there puts the trauma in perspective in a way that gives you more ability to do the work. EMDR.
Yes.
Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. When Greenwald et al. Finally get their meta-analysis published, this will be regarded as the new gold standard. You know what a meta-analysis is? It's a study that aggregates other studies. So yeah, we're in the process of doing a meta-analysis of studies in which EMDR was directly compared to other legitimate trauma treatments. And what we're finding, and we haven't finished crunching the numbers yet, so this is, I can't tell you everything, but I can tell you something. We're finding that EMDR is at least as effective as the other leading brands. Maybe equal, maybe a little more in certain ways. It sort of depends on how you look at things. It is better tolerated, fewer dropouts, and it is more efficient, meaning, for example, what takes 3 sessions of prolonged exposure, you can get done in 2 sessions of EMDR, roughly. Haven't published the meta-analysis yet, we're working on it. Yeah?
I want to clarify a little bit about what EMDR is.
I'll explain it.
Yeah, okay, good. Then never mind. You do you.
Okay. So with EMDR, the therapist guides the client to concentrate on the worst moment of the memory. Get the image in your mind. Notice what you're saying to yourself right now, your negative belief. your emotional reaction right now, where you feel it in your body. Concentrate on that, and at the same time, watch my fingers with your eyes. And the therapist does this for maybe half a minute. Okay, take a deep breath. What did you notice? What came up? And the client may have concentrated on whatever it was. There may have been some free association. Maybe the client would say, well, it's getting more vivid now, or I'm getting more scared, or I just remembered my brother was there trying to help, or I'm getting more relaxed now. We don't know what the client is going to say, but what the therapist says is, go with that, concentrate on that now. We'll do another round. And so the brain seems to know what its own next bite is. And you keep on going through more sets of eye movements while the client's concentrating on whatever came up in their mind until all the bites are digested. So EMDR was quite controversial for the first decade or so because it gained a lot of popularity over the well-researched methods, and some people were upset about that. But by now it's widely identified as among the top trauma therapies and will soon be identified as the top. So why should EMDR work so well? It turns out it has a lot of interesting elements. For one thing, it has short exposures. You're only concentrating on one piece of the memory at a time, so the client is not likely to get overwhelmed. The client has a privacy option. You don't have to tell your therapist the gory details about what happened for you to get your work done. Some clients don't care, some do. You know, I've worked with people, I'm thinking of teenage girls, for example, who just don't want to tell me what happened. And if they can get if they don't have to tell me, they can get their work done. So sometimes it really makes a difference. Another interesting thing about EMDR is that the work happens in the imagination. You don't have to tell the whole story, you don't have to write it down, you don't have to draw it, you just have to think it. And there's a body of research that indicates that the speed of thought is about 7 times faster than the speed of mouth. So I think this adds to EMDR's efficiency. Also, there's this dual focus. Reach back from behind the wall, get the next bite, activate that memory. Oh yeah, and at the same time, look over here, look over here, look over here, look over here. This was one of the early controversies with EMDR because people said, well, what are you doing the eye movements for? That doesn't do anything. Well, it does. There's been about 30 studies now, definitive finding that the distraction component, the dual focus, does contribute to treatment effect. And as a matter of fact, in our meta-analysis, we found that EMDR was more efficient than the other leading brands, with one exception. The other trauma healing methods that also had a dual focus component were about as efficient as EMDR. So there seems to be something very important about that dual focus. I'll give you my theory about it. I think it creates a sort of a mindfulness effect. Instead of only being in the memory, also not being in the memory because you're concentrating on something else, so that while the memory is activated, you're also able to not be in it and sort of be an observer. And so you're that much less overwhelmed and that much more able to do what needs to be done, whether it is the desensitization or the understanding or the emotional work. Okay. So I first heard about the counting method. I read a paper in 1996. And all right, so it was a case study. The therapist counts out loud from 1 to 100 while the client watches a movie of the memory in their mind. Right? Imagine watching a movie from beginning to end. When I say 1, be at the beginning. When I say 100, be at the end. Of course, the client in the case study got better. That's why that case got published. That's how it works. I read this and I said, that's stupid. And I forgot about it. Until about 10 years later, another study came out comparing prolonged exposure, EMDR, and the counting method. And everybody got better in all the different treatments. They got better in about 6 sessions of EMDR compared to 9 sessions of exposure. All right, that's normal. The counting method was just as fast as EMDR. Now, I've been teaching EMDR for about 20 years now. It's a pain.
Yep.
That's what I forgot to mention about EMDR. It's a complex method that's very resource intensive to learn how to do well. And so it's expensive for therapists to get trained, it's a lot of days. Then they're shaky beginners, they still need a lot of supervision and a lot of practice. It's a complex method. So this counting thing, wait a minute. You count from 1 to 100 and that's matching EMDR? I gotta find out more about this. The lead author's just down in New Haven. I went to their website looking for a course. They didn't have anything listed, so I emailed the guy. I said, I want to take the training. He said, well, we don't have anything right now. All right, can I see your treatment manual? We're revising it. If you ever want lessons on how to disseminate a trauma treatment, don't go to David Reed Johnson. Here I am, a leader in the field, trying to learn what you're doing. He couldn't tell me. Anyway, so I had the counting method on my mind, and I couldn't find out how to do it. A month or 2 later, I happened to be in northern Israel. I'm teaching a 5-day child trauma therapy workshop at a children's hospital in Tzfat. On the 4th day, normally I would be teaching a child-modified version of exposure. But I have this counting method on my mind. I say, hey, do you mind if I teach you something I never tried before? He said, sure. You know, it's the 4th day, we know each other by now, whatever. All right, but I'm not going to teach it the right way. I'm going to change it to what I would do for children. So I thought, a movie of 100 for a child, that's kind of too much all at once. So we started with a movie just from 1 to 10. And then 1 to 20 the next time, then 1 to 30 the next time. Then 1 to 40, etc. Worked really well. I was kind of surprised. The people liked it, they got better from the traumas they were practicing with each other. I had another group the next week, I tried the same thing, it worked great. A couple weeks later, I finally got an email. Here's our treatment manual, we revised it. That's when I realized how much I'd messed up. I had misunderstood. It turns out that the real counting method, that movie thing, is only once at the beginning of the session. And the whole rest of the session, you're guiding the client to talk about what was in the movie and how they feel about it. Which is a lot like those slower methods that are more of an ordeal. This is when I started losing sleep. I mean, literally, I was so upset. I said, wait a minute. Prolonged exposure plus 100 seconds of counting, you know, and suddenly you're matching EMDR. What if we do more of those movies and cut out all the talking? Because with those movies, look what you get. You get the privacy option, the work's happening in the imagination, the controlled dose because you know when it's going to be over, you can start small, etc. You get the dual focus. Okay, with EMDR, it's watch here, watch here, watch here. With the counting method, it's activate the memory in your mind and listen to me count. So there's a dual focus. And all these elements. So this is how progressive counting got developed, because I misunderstood the counting method. So it's based on the counting method, but it's just all movies. Bring your popcorn. You know, it's just movies over and over. We don't require clients to tell us about it. We allow them to, because sometimes it's very important to be able to say out loud, this is what happened to me, I want to say it out loud and I want you to hear it. So that can be very important for certain clients at certain moments. So we leave the door open for that, but we don't push the clients through. People decide for themselves. It starts at a count of 10. It builds by 10 each time. So that you're starting with a low dose and gradually exposing spreading it out more as people have hopefully at least digested some. The beginning of the movie is before anything bad happened. And the ending of the movie is after the bad part is already over. And so you're building in that broader life perspective. It's not all in the trauma. So it seems to have all the key elements that make the other trauma treatment methods work. It seems to be efficient, effective, and well tolerated. By the way, we've published 2 comparisons of PC to EMDR so far. And it seems to be about as effective as EMDR, at least as well tolerated. It's even less emotionally intense. And EMDR is already better tolerated than the more traditional methods. And it's even more efficient than EMDR. Now, the one study where we calculated it, we found a 37% efficiency advantage. That's only one study. You can't take that to the bank. We've got 3 more studies we're crunching the numbers on now. We've already got the data, but I can't tell you what the efficiency looks like. I can tell you that PC is still more efficient, but I can't tell you percentage or anything like that at this point. Another couple months. And it's about as simple to get good at as the other more traditional exposure methods, which still takes some learning and doing. It's not nothing, but it's not as complicated as EMDR. So, there are other trauma healing methods that are also promising, and next year or the year after that, they might get on this list too. But right now, in terms of the research that's been done, I'm most excited about EMDR and about PC because of their various advantages. I want to talk about one more. Go ahead.
I just want to know why you didn't include PC on the list.
Oh, just because I gave it its own slide.
Oh.
That's all. Because I wanted to talk more about it.
I see. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. There's one more development I want to tell you about, and then open it up for questions and